I really enjoy it and have fun with a lot of this. It's not near as important as awareness and trying to learn how to communicate with each other. You know, and so there are no good personalities or bad personalities. They're not there. It should be in your notes now. There's no good personalities and there's no bad personalities. There's not any. Here's... Well, we're about out of sheets again, Johnny. There's no... Let me see that a minute. Yeah, okay. That's where we are. Right up the top of wonderfully made. Okay, there are no good personalities or bad personalities. I don't care how much you want to think there is, there's not. There's none. One personality, and here's something else, and we'll talk about this some in a few weeks in advance. Hey guys, this room is really noisy. When y'all chatter, we can hear you. Or I can. It makes me hard to think. There are no good or bad personalities, but there are weaknesses and strengths in every personality. One personality type is not more likely to sin than another. It's just that the personality will affect the way they sin. Your personality doesn't affect whether you sin or not. It affects how you do it a lot of times. And remember this, Psalms 139 verse 14 says, "Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your workmanship is marvelous, and how well I know it." Your workmanship is marvelous, and how well I know it. See, the overuse, I said this last week, but I'll say it again. The overuse of our strengths usually become our greatest weaknesses. We're always worried about our weaknesses, but you know what? As we look at these things, we'll talk about this as we go along. Almost always what gets us in trouble is over-relying on our strengths and not being able to consider other people. That's what gets us in trouble in relationships. And the Scripture tells us to trust in the Lord with all of our heart, to lean not to our own understanding. And look at Proverbs 28:26. I think this goes along with what we're studying very well. He who trusts in himself is a fool, but he who walks in wisdom is kept safe. Now, if we'll learn to walk in wisdom towards others, we'll be kept safe. I wanted just to quickly review the goals for this study. It's to perceive we are all special and uniquely made by God. To better understand ourselves, to better understand others, to improve our relationships, whether that's marriage, family, friendships, or ministry, and to discover and enhance our careers. I believe that this study can help do all those things. It can help us know what direction to go in. And as I said, the profiles are interesting. I'd encourage you to do so. I encourage you to look at it. But more important than for sure identifying what you are. How many of you all were more confused after you took the personality profile than you were before? We have any? You know, that happens some. A flat line can mean two or three things. A flat line can mean you're trying too hard. A flat line can mean, if you remember, we said that where do personalities, where do they come from? Anybody remember what we said? Personalities are a product of a few different things. One thing that our personality comes from is birth or raised. If you have no D in you and you're raised with a strong D, there's a very good chance by the time you get rescued from that house, I'm teasing, but you know what I'm saying. There's not anything wrong with a D. But by the time you get out of that house, you're going to probably have some developed D in you. A lot of times that represents growth. A lot of times it means we're growing when we have more than one. Or it can mean that you're just trying to please everybody. So you just have to decide on your own which one it is. But I've always graded a lot of different ones kind of close to the line in almost every test I've ever taken. I hope that means that I'm growing and not that I'm trying to please everybody. But anyway, so just keep that in mind as we keep going. the Bible tells us that a scoffer seeks wisdom in vain. So we want to be open to what it takes to bless others. I want one warning before we really start diving into this. If you're going to proclaim to everybody that's got a little familiarity about the personalities, if you're going to try to proclaim what you are, be sure you are that. I've had people say, I'm a lion, which is the D. I'm a lion, I'm a lion. And you try to relate to them like a lion, and their feelings get hurt. You know what that means? They're not what they think they are. And so, if you're going to proclaim what you are, be sure you are that. Because you're actually, anybody that's trying to relate to you, when you say I'm this, you're saying, please relate to me like this. So it's important that, it's not important that you tell everybody what you are, but it is important that if you do, you are that. So keep that in mind. So we need to understand that. Try not to look at the answer real quick. Which personality do you think is the most difficult to get along with? That's a trick question, right? Yeah. Okay. It's not a particular one, believe it or not. It has to do with these 5 things. Often, the one the most difficult to get along with is the one I least understand. Another one way that they're hard to get along with, sometimes the one the hardest to get along with is the one the most like you. Sometimes the one the hardest to get along with is the one that we associate with hurt. And sometimes the one that's the hardest for us to get along with is really any of the ones that are totally out of control. And then this is something else can make it hard for us to get along with, and we need this, but it still can make it difficult for us to get along with them. The one whose methods challenge me or make me uncomfortable. Make me uncomfortable. Often they challenge me because the way they handle things touch an area in which I'm insecure. So now we're ready. I don't know how far we'll get tonight, but we're starting tonight. And tonight we're going to discover the lion. The roaring lion. I thought a Bible verse that went along with this is the righteous are bold as a lion. Now something I want you to remember about the D, and I have, if you remember, there's all kinds of studies. Some will say there's 8 personality types, but most of them agree that there's at least 4. And as we said earlier, 80% of the people are a mixture. 20% of the people are mainly one. And so as we look at these, you may find areas that fit you and some areas that don't. And that's fine. Just learn from it. You may see areas in some people that you relate to some of these and some that don't. So let's look at the lion. The lion, they are naturally good at overcoming opposition to accomplish results. Matter of fact, probably the most natural, I think we're all to a point competitive, but the most naturally competitive one is D, is lion. It's just natural for them. They love the fight. They love the game. They love the competition. They love to win. Of course, I think we all love to win, but you know what I'm saying there. So they also measure success by getting things done. I'm not sure I said this, but they're task-oriented. Now, I think we said it last week when we mentioned it. Task means what? It means you see the task first. When the task and the people collide, you naturally see the task before you see the person. Now that should already bring a little peace to you if you know any D's, because a lot of times we think D's or lions, because of their roar, we think they're kind of cruel, right? Because they don't always notice when they've hurt somebody's feelings. And so, should they learn some? Yes, but part of it is their gifting. No, that's what I want you to see about all these. There's giftings in all of these. If we use them right, there's giftings in every single one of them. They are direct and to the point. Do you know anybody in your life that's more direct than you're comfortable with? Anybody got people in your life? I'm not saying to the person sitting next to you. I'm just saying people in your life that are more direct than you're comfortable with. You know, and that may mean that you don't have a whole lot of D, and that person does. And catch this. Now you got to catch this. They do not respond well to hints. They do not respond well to hints. As a matter of fact, they usually don't even realize you've hinted, or they view hinting as weakness and cowardness, because if you really had something to say to them, you would just tell them, because that's what they would do to you. Right? And so, you know, and boy, that can be really difficult for the I's and the S's. I mean, conflict is real scary to the I's and the S's anyway. And so when you have to be direct with somebody, often the I's and the S's, and I'm talking about the otters and the oxes, often by the time conflict happens, it's already a mess. And they prefer not to have any conflict. As I said earlier, the lions thrive off of it. As a matter of fact, the lion can have an argument with somebody, and you'd think they hate each other. 5 minutes later, they're over it. Because the argument was a means to get to an end. But for a lot of people, an argument means we're not getting along. Right? So you can see how that if you don't begin to understand where this person's coming from, and I've had a few in the church over the years, and I'll be honest with you, I'm a hinter. Let's just slowly reveal it. You know, let's slowly get it out there. How many of me's in that area have we got in here? You know, let's just make sure. No need to hurt anybody's feelings. Let's just feel around here, and eventually we'll get to the place. You know, so usually when I'm dealing with a D, if I try to do that, the only person frustrated is me, because usually they don't even know I'm hinting, because they appreciate D. The reason why that it's used as the D in the profile is they appreciate direct. And so a phrase that usually describes the attitude of the lion is when the going gets tough, the tough get going. They are naturally good at the tough side of love. Now, folks, you've heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. Love is a two-sided coin. It has to have a certain amount of toughness, and it has to have compassion. It's not either or, it's both. But usually because of our personality, we're better at one than the other. Would you say amen to that? Huh? And you know, and that's another reason why God often puts us together, because often if the man is good at the tough side of love, he's married to a woman that's good at the soft side of love. If you learn to appreciate that, you'll save yourself all kinds of pain and trouble. But if your whole goal is to make your spouse like you, well, do I have to tell you? It don't work. It sure doesn't. You know, and they are naturally, as I said, good at that. And remember, the Bible says that there needs to be a toughness in their love. It says, he who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him disciplines him promptly. That's the tough side of love. So some positive traits when they're under control, when they're living on the right side of this, is they work well under pressure, They like challenges. They like emergencies. They get things done. They are very decisive. Have you ever noticed that you don't have to ask a line or a D, whichever one you want to refer to it in, you don't have to ask them their opinion twice? Have you noticed that? Sometimes you don't even have to ask them, but you know what I'm saying. They assume you want to know what they're thinking, you know. They're confident, they're ambitious, they're determined. They're more of a doer than a talker. And this one may sound odd to you, they usually control their emotions, especially, now we're talking about when they're under control. Although they naturally roar, and some people, you know, some people assume they're angry when they're not, because they've usually got a pretty good roar to them. And so, but when they're under control, they usually are really good at controlling their emotions, because why? They're seeing black and white. They're seeing the task. They're working in the task. They have natural strengths to lead, although I believe in the Scripture and otherwise you'll find leaders with every personality type. So I'm not in any way saying they're the only leaders, but they have natural strengths to lead. And they usually don't hold grudges when conflict produces results. Now we're ready to do some negative traits when they're out of control or are overusing their strengths. They are naturally intimidating. How many of you all agree with me from your personality traits that one of the most intimidating people you know has this personality? How many of you? And again, sometimes that's as much about us as it is them. But especially when they're out of control. I mean, they're very intimidating. They can value progress over quality. They seem to have no emotions except for displeasure or anger. They're overconfident. They're reckless. They're insensitive. They appear arrogant. They run over people. They're short-tempered. They're tactless. They assume the ends justify the means. They hide their affection. And they're unaware of people's opinions and feelings. Now, how many of you all recognize this may be even better than the strengths? Because a lot of times, that's what we see, right? A lot of times that's what we notice. And we don't realize how strong this person can be. So they need to understand that they can come across to others, even though this may not be intentional, and it may not even be true. Catch this. They need to recognize, even though it's not intentional, and sometimes it may not even be the truth, that they can come across to people as overbearing, as uncaring, as proud, as angry, as without feelings, and as unfriendly. They need to realize that. They need to realize it. They need people around them who will help them. And we're going to go through this on every personality, so we're not picking on one. They need people around them who will help them recognize their need for others. Because usually the lion is very self-confident and thinks he doesn't necessarily or she doesn't necessarily need anybody else. We can take care of it ourselves. That task-oriented people often do that. You know, they feel like the difference in this and the eagle, we'll talk about the eagle later, is the eagle thinks nobody else can do it good enough, and the lion thinks nobody else can do it fast enough. So it can be hard for them to partner up with others. They need people, and folks, now as we study this is what you need to recognize. You don't get to tell God what your children are going to be. And although your environment's going to influence them, can you imagine and we hadn't gone through all of it, but we kind of went through, those of you who were here last week, we did kind of go through just a little introduction. The S, the people person, the mild person, the ox, the steady S or the ox. Can you imagine them having a lion child? If they don't learn how to handle that, it won't be long till the child will be running the house. Not because they're mean, but because that's the way they see the world. So we have to adopt and realize that in how we deal with kids. And the last week, when we do the last of this, we're going to talk some about how this really relates to children and parenting and in more detail. But I think it's critical. To tell one, Jesse has a lot of recognizable I. He's always had a whole lot of it. He has some other things. He has some C and he has some D. And I'm not sure whether this was the C or the D in him. We were sitting at the table one time, and he was, I don't know, 7 years old. And we were sitting at the table, and he'd run out of, and he might have been a little younger than that, and he'd run out of his juice. And so I don't remember which one it was, I told Rebecca or Matthew one, I said, go get him some juice. He looked at me and he said, he put his arms like that, and he said, no, Daddy, they got it the last time. For a minute, I wanted to kill him. You know what I'm saying? For a minute, he was just being sassy and he needed his bottom spanked. But I just kind of sat back for a minute and recognized he was trying to correct something that he saw as a wrong. He was not being sassy. Now, that doesn't mean I could necessarily... So once I recognized that, I laughed about it and I let one of them go get it anyway because I'm still the boss. But you know, being able to recognize, my first inclination was this boy needs his bottom warmed up. Tell me what to do. Right? And I'm not in any way claiming that we were perfect in how we raised him, but I'm just saying that began, and I made all kinds of mistakes, but recognizing where they're coming from helps you to deal with it correctly. Helps you not to overreact. Helps you to understand, you know, who they are. You still need rules. They still need to follow things. But, you know, some kids you yell at and you motivate them. Some kids you yell at and you demotivate them. And so, you know, you can, if you like life full of conflict, you can deal with them just because you're the boss. Or you can begin to realize who they are and learn to guide them into doing what's right so that when they leave the house, they make decisions based on character instead of force. And that's what we want, right? That's what we want in their lives. And so realizing that they're motivated differently is a big part of that. So as we said, they need people around them. We all need people around us, right? And we need those people to help us. We need people in our lives that'll help us, and we need to realize that. We need people around us that will help us recognize our need for others, structure a stable and predictable environment. You know, that's something about the lions. They don't mind change. They don't mind, well, we're doing it this way. Hey, let's try this. Oh, so fine. If it'll work better, let's do it. Some people, it's like, oh my goodness, don't tell me we're changing. We've done it this way for 75 years, you know. They need people around them to help them to weigh pros and cons. They need people around them because they are usually willing to take risk. They need people around them who will help them reasonably calculate risk. And they need to learn to use caution when needed. They need people to remind them of the need for a team and recognize the value of people beyond the job. You know, they take charge often without permission, and they often do things without thinking. So they need people around them to help them. And you need to be really willing to listen to those people. You know, this isn't about, well, this is about a two-way relationship. If you are a line, you need to understand how you're coming across to people, realize your need for people. And if you aren't, you need to realize how they tick so that you can be direct with them. You can share with them in a way that they can hear and motivate the relationship in a positive way. So what are some of their giftings? They're often pioneers. They're willing to get involved even if the outcome is likely negative. You don't have to wonder where they stand, and they get to the point. They're able to push onward in the face of criticism and opposition. We need people like that, don't we? Now, I always think this is fun. We're going to look at a D personality trait in the Bible. Now, we don't know enough about these people to know whether they were a mix or not. So what I'm picking out here is something that they did that the lion would do readily and easily. And so, first of all, I mean, the one that I see, how many of you would agree, without us even going into this very far, that Paul would likely be a lion? You know, why do I say that? He didn't mind confrontation. You know, the Bible says in Galatians chapter 2, verse 11 and 14, it says, when Peter came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face. Look what it says. This is a D statement, because he clearly was wrong. When I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter in front of them, and that's another D statement, in front of them all, you are a Jew, yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How is it then that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? I mean, that was a D personality type response right there. His life was full of purpose and vision. Remember, he said, I press toward the goal, the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. He was a driver. How'd I know that? Now, Barnabas was determined to take with them John called Mark, but Paul insisted that they should not take them. The one who had departed from them and had gone with them had not gone with them to do the work. Look what it says. And the contention became so sharp that they parted from one another. And so Barnabas took Mark and sailed to Cyprus. Also says, at number 4, Paul departed to Tarsus. This is a D statement. And there was peace. You know, and when the brothers learned of this, they took him down to Caesarea and sent him off to Tarsus. Then the church throughout Judea, Galilee, Samaria enjoyed a time of peace. But something else that I really love about Paul, and I think is a D personality trait, often the rest of us, how many of you, I think we all want to follow the Lord. I'm just going to assume that. But how many of you like to make sure that you make sure that you make sure before you take your steps? Huh? Especially when it's something, maybe not, you know, hopefully you're not asking God if you get out of bed in the morning. I'd recommend against that, you know. But when it's a big decision, you want to follow the Lord and you just pray about it, you pray about it, you pray about it, and you pray about it. Paul, a D trait is, and he really, I believe he followed the Lord, but Paul went until the Spirit told him not to. Right? We see that several times in the Bible. 2 examples in your notes there where, you know, until the Spirit told him not to or gave him clear direction, he said, I'm called to go, so I'm going. I'm doing something. He took bold steps without having specific directions. I didn't list this in your notes because this could simply be a result of the gospel's impact on their life and nothing about them personally. However, Paul and Barnabas did not let the splitting up incident destroy their relationship. They still had mutual respect for each other. As we said, these can fight over something and still be fine. It says, because later, as Paul was imprisoned, he speaks of Barnabas, and at another time he speaks of him, and all of it was later. One of them was 54 AD, another one was 62, and when they split up, it was 48 AD. And he said Barnabas, he's put Barnabas on the same level as himself, talking about him as an apostle. So those are some line or D traits that we have about the lion. Now we're ready for the otter. And would you think the otter is people oriented or task oriented? People, and they're very optimistic. The verse I use for them is, I'm still confident of this, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Some general information about the otter. And remember, they see the person. People-oriented means they see the person before the task. It does not mean they can't do a task. It does not mean that the task does not matter to them. It just means when one is more prevalent to them than the other, they're more concerned about people than they are the task. So here's some general information. They're naturally good at bringing others into alliance to accomplish results. They often measure success by harmony and fun. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Don't send a high eye on a quick pickup to the grocery store. They can't go anywhere quick because they know everybody there. And everybody there knows them. And it would be rude not to talk to them. Right? And so, as I said, they seem to know everyone in the room and everyone seems to know them. They are the life of the party and often touchy-feely. They like to get up in your face and talk to you. Huh? Come on. They like to hug. And I know, as we've been around in church and as we've, grown and a lot of us of different personalities like to hug, but it's a whole different level with an eye. I mean, a lot of times that, and I love it. Donna has a friend. We have a friend, a ministry friend, and you can almost. I just hide and watch because the very minute Donna's got used to her, but the very minute we see this lady, she's going to have to hug Donna. And those of you who know Donna know that Donna's not a big hugger. She likes her space. And so it's become a joke over the years that she might as well go ahead and get her hug because she's going to get it anyway. They're often, they just love everybody, right? Come on. They just love everybody. And they get up in your face and the phrase that usually describes their attitude is, let's get excited. They're naturally good at the soft side of love. They're usually, they're able to read the audience when they speak. They can often tell, some of the other personalities, especially the D personality, if they make a speech, they can be so clueless, everybody in the room can be asleep and they'll never know it. But an eye would know that because an eye is feeding off of their responses because the eye loves people. I like what John Wesley said. He said, light yourself on fire with passion and people will come from miles around to watch you burn. So there's, a lot of times that's the eye, that's the otter. So what's some positive traits when they're under control, when not overusing their strengths? First of all, they're full of life and enthusiastic. And have you noticed even on the line how that then the overuse of their strength is the exact same? It just comes across in a different way. So they're open-minded, flexible, and able to compromise. They're great encouragers. They love encouraging people. They have many friends. They're usually about that deep, but they have a lot of friendships. They are high energy. They're spontaneous. They're affectionate. They're verbal. They apologize easily. They're good for the group, and they're very motivational. So here's some negative traits when they're out of control or are overusing their strengths. They're obnoxious with their excitement. Right? Yeah. It's a turnoff. They don't ever seem to be dealing with facts because everything's always wonderful. Everything's great. Let's get excited. They often have a hard time focusing, though. A real hard time focusing, especially when they're out of control. Number 3, they don't follow through. Their sudden outburst in excitement is lost in the newest thing to be excited about. They are the people who want to start things, but when it comes time to do it, they're never there. Often because they've already found something else, as I said, to be excited about. They have few deep relationships, and it's not because they don't love people, it's just because they have surface relationships with a multitude of people. Have you? Now, I have some of this. I have a lot more than this than Donna and me. She used to get upset at me because of how many people, if we went out to eat somewhere in Carthage, how many people would stop to talk to me. And I've got some higher eye friends than me, and you can go in somewhere at a restaurant, and I really don't know whether they know everybody or not, but you would think they do. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, if somebody doesn't come up and talk to them, they found somebody to go talk to. Everybody in there, and you can't tell, and they're not putting on. I'm not saying they don't put on. They really have an enjoyment of people, an enjoyment of being around people. And so they just go and go and go. And so, but one of the negative things to that is sometimes they don't feel close, really close to anybody. And we all need people that we're close to. And so they also can be very undisciplined. They can be too compromising because they want everybody to be at peace. They can often be the first to quit. And when they're out of control, remember, we're talking about when they're out of control, they're overcommitted. They say yes without considering what will suffer with their yes. They say yes without considering what else is going to suffer because they're trying to do something they don't have time to do. Which means they have difficulty saying no. They have difficulty saying no, even if it kills them. They have difficulty saying no. But this can happen when they're out of control. They apologize for peace, not because they mean it. In other words, they apologize insincerely. Remember, we're not judging people. This is, when we start talking about the weaknesses, we're just talking about, as we begin to understand that people have these weaknesses, it's no longer personal. When we understand where people are coming from, we don't have to make it personal anymore. Because you know what? People rarely do things because of you anyway. They do things because of themselves. And they respond to you, yes, and we should recognize and see that. So, they apologize insincerely. They're over-descriptive and therefore often inaccurate. Not necessarily because they're purposely trying to tell a story, but because they get so excited about the story they're telling that it grows and it grows and it grows. Like we tease our friends, if we caught a fish, we'd say when they first caught it, they'd say it was this big. By the time they got through, it was this big. That can be an I trait. They can be, and we can all do that to a point, I understand that. So what do they need to understand? They need to understand that they can come across to others. Remember what I said, saying the same exact thing we said about the line. Even though it may not be true or intentional, they come across to others often as insincere, undependable. Why? They told you they'd be there. 4 weeks in a row, and you hadn't seen them yet. You know? But they meant to. When they weren't lying to you, they had every intention of being there. Me and Robert know somebody that we used to see out in public quite often. Every time we saw that person, he'd say, "I see you Sunday." We were confused. We thought he meant this Sunday. And how does that come across to you? Whether it's right or wrong, comes across as they're not serious, they're not sincere, they're not dependable. You know, and they're different than lions. Lions can be loud because of the roar. The otters can be loud because of the fun. Right? Because they're so excited. And so they can come across as too loud. Because of some of the things we've talked about, they can come across as wishy-washy. Because they do care about people and they want peace, they can come across as spineless. Because they overcommit and there's no way for them to do everything they say they're going to do, they can come across as quitters. They can come across as compromising of values. And because they're touchy-feely, they can come across as flirty. You know? And sometimes maybe they are, but sometimes they aren't. But they can definitely come across that way when they're coming up in your face, and you're not an in-your-face person, and they're touching you. I heard a pastor one time, he was good friends with this family, and he was cutting up kind of, but he told this woman that I was talking about earlier was coming up, putting her hands on him, on his shoulder, and he said to her, she says, "You've touched me more today than my wife." Which, by the way, you know, in this world, that can be a problem. Right? So they need people around them who will help them. We all need people around us that will help us. You know, people can't help them if you won't let them. You know, they're kind of like the D in this, but they're different. Both them and the lions, a lot of times, shoot first and ask questions later. But it's for different motivations. For them, it's because of excitement. So they need people that will help them concentrate on single task. They need to seek facts. They need to learn to speak directly. They need to learn to develop systematic approaches instead of being all over the place. They need to deal with tasks and not just people. You know what? You got to get done with the task. Things have to get done. They need to follow through. They need to have logical approaches. They need to follow through and finish projects. They need to establish priorities and reach deadlines. They need to balance inspiration with steadiness. So what's their gifting? They supply excitement to an idea. They reach out to strangers and include others early and readily. They find humor even in hard times. They help bring groups together with creative compromise, and they often discern how another person is feeling early and quickly. All those can be wonderful things, right? Thank God for them. So what's an I personality trait that we find in the Bible? Peter, right? You know where I'm going with this, right? Saw Jesus out walking on the water. He made a quick, emotional decision. Now, maybe it was faith. You know, a lot of times I do have a lot of faith. But sometimes I wonder, because he seemed to be the person that, as I said, shoot first, ask questions later. And so, Jesus, if that's you, tell me to come out on the water. If that's really you, tell me to come out. And Jesus said, come on. And there he goes. And I think about all the other personalities on the boat. You know, they were probably sitting there, hope he drowns, serve him right. Right? Reckless, crazy thing, what's he talking about? You know. So, but what did it give him? It gave him an experience that not one of the other apostles ever had. So again, that's a positive, right? He enthusiastically expressed his views. You remember when Jesus told him, tonight you'll desert me? Jesus told him, for the scriptures say, God will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. To which Peter declared, even if everyone else deserts you, I never will. But if I remember the scripture right, when he got under pressure, he denied having anything to do with Jesus. And again, he denied it and disowned him with an oath, saying, I don't know the man. I don't know who you're talking about here. I don't know him. So that can be, all of those things right there can be an eye trait. And we had some good, right? He had a wonderful experience walking on the water, experiencing who Jesus was. He walked out there on the water, but then he also, when things didn't go like he was expecting and when conflict arose, he backed down. And so that is the D, and that is the I, or that is the lion, and that is the otter. Are there any questions? Anything you thought of while we were going through that? Open forum right now. We don't have time tonight to do the S and the C, so we'll probably just go ahead and wrap it up.
I have a question
All right.
that I thought of. So these things that can help the different personalities, what if a mixture of one personality basically does not allow you to help them? Like, kind of, you know, and you want to help somebody concentrate more on the task and you try to like bring them towards that, but then they recognize that, you know, hey, I want to do it my way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, really and truly, that's where the awareness that you would like to do that doesn't equal that they're going to let you. I mean, even with your children, sometimes it can be hard when they have a different personality.
I see that in me, like, yeah, I could use some of this help, but as soon as someone pointed it out, it would be like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, so that's why we go through this, to help you be aware, so that maybe, and since you used yourself, so that maybe when that happens, you'll be more willing to say, yes, I do need that. Yes, I do need to listen to that. You know, and sometimes the problem with the D is they don't even want to hear it. You know, hearing it doesn't mean you have to do it. But hearing it can expand your knowledge and your understanding, and sometimes you'll realize it is a better way of doing it. But sometimes just the fact that you've listened helps you out. Just the fact that you're aware there is another way of doing it besides your own way. And yeah, so, you know, that's the more than one-fold way that we're trying to learn here. Number one, we want this to cause us to be willing to have that to happen to us. But we also realize that even if we see somebody else's need, we can make ourselves available. But if they won't let us, we can't help them. Anybody else? No questions, huh? All right. How many do we have here You can go ahead and turn that off if you want to. How many do we have here that